This is Inner Work, a spiritual growth podcast, a sanctuary for healers, light workers, and spiritual practitioners here to raise consciousness on this planet. You've come to the right place to heal yourself and fully awaken your unique gifts so you can show up to serve others as powerfully and purposefully as possible. I am your host, Josephine Hartman, a certified intuitive healer and Akashic Records master teacher. I'm honored you're here and delighted to walk with you on your path for a little while. To connect with me and explore ways of working together, please head over to josephinehartman.com. The human ego is one of the major obstacles, if not the major obstacle, that can create static, noise, and interference in spiritual practice, and more specifically in being able to powerfully and easily connect to the Akashic Records. I get multiple questions every week in one way or another about how to get the ego self and ego mind out of the way when working with the records. So these questions come in from my students, from listeners of this podcast, from members of my email community, and from people doing my free Akashic Records mini course as well. Now, of course, sometimes people might not be fully aware that they're asking about ego interference. So they might ask about, how do I get self-doubt out of the way when I'm going into the records? Or how do I silence this incessant mental chatter that comes up? Or how do I get beyond being attached to what happens or doesn't happen, or what I see or don't see whenever I am in the records? All of these questions at their core are about ego-mind interference. So I figured it would be a good idea to put together a mini series on this topic for the podcast. So here we are. This is part 4, where we are going through the most common forms of ego-mind interference. And I'm giving you some tips and strategies for how to clear out that interference so it doesn't derail you, it doesn't prevent you from connecting to the Akashic Records, or from expanding your spiritual practice and your intuition in really powerful ways. If you've been getting value out of this podcast, I would be so thrilled and forever grateful if you would take a minute or two to leave a rating or leave a review or both on whichever podcast app you are listening to this right now. If you do that, it really helps the podcast grow. It helps the podcast to find its way to more listeners just like you. It means the world to me, so thank you so much for your support. You are also warmly and lovingly invited to join my email community if you haven't done that yet. And if you join us by clicking the link in the show notes, then you will get access to my free Akashic Records mini course and weekly newsletter. So, ego interference in Akashic Records work, part 4. And today we're talking about avoidance and spiritual bypassing and using the records as a way to escape reality. So let me start here. The Akashic Records can absolutely help you release everything that doesn't serve you. They can help you shed layers upon layers of human density. They can help you transmute old and stuck emotions and experiences. They can help you gain a much deeper understanding of yourself and your highest purpose. This is why we use the records. This is why we learn how to masterfully navigate the Akashic field of healing light and divine wisdom and information. And I can vouch for the records myself in this way, that I have experienced all of these forms of healing in working with the records for my personal evolution for 20 years now. And I've seen my students and clients be powerfully transformed by turning on the energy of the records in their lives over the past decade. For me, it's a true privilege every single day and a joy to get to do this work. At the same time, what I'm getting at with this podcast series is that our human egos, because they're sneaky and because they want to keep us safe, quote unquote, safe, and maintain the status quo and avoid change at all costs. With something like a spiritual practice, the ego may try to distract us away from our commitment to that practice, or may even tempt us in different ways to use our spiritual tools and practices in ways that serve the ego or serve the ego's agendas, instead of actually using those tools and practices to serve our highest self and highest purpose, and to serve our desire for genuine healing and transformation, which is why we come to these practices and tools like the Akashic Records in the first place. So, to put this into a little bit of more context, I want to share an important quote from spiritual and Buddhist teacher Jack Kornfield. So he says, we must understand that meditation, like any kind of therapy or spiritual discipline, can be used in skillful ways for freedom, for liberation, for opening the heart. They can also be used in defensive ways in service of the ego and of our fears. So we do not have to deal with certain difficulties or feel certain difficult emotions by paying attention to the light so that we can avoid certain aspects of our shadow, our dark side. So that quote is, again, from teacher Jack Kornfield from his essay, Obstacles and Vicissitudes in Spiritual Practice. So working with the records as a regular and consistent endeavor is very similar to committing to a regular meditation practice. And just as with meditation, we can use our Akashic Records work in all kinds of different ways. So as Kornfield puts it, we can use that work for freedom, for liberation, for opening the heart, or in service of the ego and of our fears, as a way to avoid reality, as a way to avoid difficult emotions, or as a way to avoid facing the shadows in ourselves. So this is a poignant and necessary reminder that as we walk the spiritual path, as we work with tools like the Akashic Records, we still bring all of our human aspects with us. We must be aware of these aspects, including our attachments, our illusions, our past conditioning, all of our fears, our doubts, our egoic distractions. We have to be aware of these aspects of ourselves so we can stay one step ahead and not allow any of these aspects to derail or sabotage the work that we're up to, or not to allow our egos to sabotage us. Another important thing to keep in mind is if we have any tendency in ourselves to spiritually bypass that which is difficult or confronting, so the things and the issues and the questions that are challenging us in our day-to-day lives. I've seen people at times use the records or try to use the records to escape their daily reality, to escape or avoid the tough situations that they might be facing, or to try to cover up deeply held, long held emotions, maybe anger, maybe grief that are wanting to come up to be felt and to be expressed. So, because we're human, because we're flawed, and that's okay, we may try to use the records as a way to bypass all of this, to bypass that which is uncomfortable or that which is painful. We may try to use our spiritual practice to cover all of that up, or to try to convince ourselves that we're just fine, that it's all okay, we're beyond all of that, or that everything happens for a reason, that we don't need to move through these tough emotions or feel the feelings that are coming up to be felt. Now, of course, let me say, I do believe everything does happen for a reason, but with spiritual bypassing, we're often trying to jump too quickly to what that reason might be. So, what the purpose of a challenging or painful situation, maybe even a trauma. We're jumping too quickly to try to figure out what that might be. And so that means we're jumping over some of the steps that need to be involved, because before we jump to what is the silver lining here, or what is the lesson here, what's the reason for this, before we do that, we want to honor our feelings, we want to feel and hold our feelings and just really be with them. So we have to acknowledge those internal feelings, experiences, the grief, the anger, the sadness, whatever it is that might be coming up to be felt, and just really face the feelings and be with the wounds of what we may have experienced, not running away from that, not trying to make it all pretty, or try to convince ourselves that it didn't hurt us as much as it did. So we have to get into reality about all of that first, about where we are really standing right now. And from there, having felt our feelings, having acknowledged where we are, where we've come from, honestly taking inventory of all of that, only then can we move into an exploration of what is the deeper purpose, or what is the lesson or the silver lining of a particular situation, or wounding, past wounding that we may have experienced. So we have to remain keenly aware of any tendency in ourselves to use spiritual practices or tools, including the Akashic Records, as forms of avoidance, as ways to unconsciously reject and turn away from day-to-day human reality, the day-to-day human reality that we are each experiencing. So this requires us to continually check ourselves, to check internally, and evaluate how we are using our tools, our practices, and our rituals. So, a good set of questions I like to use for this, I'm going to share this with you, and you can apply this to Akashic Records work. You can apply it to other practices as well. So, just feel free to use it however is most helpful. So, in order to do an internal check, you can ask yourself, number one, what's my intention for using the Akashic Records or going into the records for myself today? What's my intention? Number two, what am I hoping to experience, transform, release, or heal by using the Akashic Records or whatever tool or practice I am using today? So, what am I hoping to experience, to transform, to release, and/or to heal by using this practice that I'm using? Number three, what's my state of mind as I prepare to open the Akashic Records, or to use my tarot deck, or to use my pendulum, or to sit down and meditate, whatever the practice is? what's my state of mind as I prepare to do that? So from what place in myself am I approaching this? Am I approaching this from a state of curiosity and receptivity and love and desire for expansion? Or am I coming at this from a place of fear, scarcity, judgment of others, self-judgment, worry, anxiety, nervousness, all of these frequencies and states of being that really could interfere with the practice that you are preparing to do. Number 4, if I listen intently and without judgment, is there anything in my life or reality that I'm avoiding or resisting right now? So number 4 is a really important question, especially to steer clear of any tendency to use spiritual practices as a form of escapism. So let me say it again. If I listen and I notice intently and without judgment, is there anything in my life or in my reality that I am avoiding or resisting right now? And then you can also ask, can working with the Akashic Records help me face and move through this challenging thing? Am I going to use the records properly to face and move through this challenging experience, whatever it might be that you are avoiding or resisting, if there is something? Or am I reaching for this tool or this practice as a form of avoidance? And that question requires us to be exquisitely honest with ourselves and really honest about where we are standing right now. So, of course, it can be challenging to move through these questions and answer them really transparently, but it is just a required part of using spirituality in grounded, ethical, aligned ways that are really going to serve our highest self and our highest purpose instead of serving the ego's agendas. So getting really honest about all of this, about how we are implementing our spirituality in daily life, that can make a life-changing difference. It can support you in creating genuine transformation and healing through the tools and the practices that you choose to use, including the records. And of course, the beautiful thing about the records is that you can bring anything and everything you're feeling, everything you have within you, including your dysfunctions, your wounds, your hangups, your patterns. You can bring all of that without shame and just put that on the table, look at it openly, and be held in a field of unconditional love, unconditional support, non-judgment that can really help you untangle whatever it is you need to untangle, release whatever it is you need to release, and really move through whatever it is you need to move through. And this is why the records sometimes won't give us easy, clear-cut answers, because they want to help us do this deep inner work and not give in to spiritual bypassing or avoidance. I hope this has offered a new or deeper perspective on avoiding avoidance and being really mindful of any impulse or tendency to bypass or try to escape reality by turning to our spiritual tools and practices. Thank you so much for being here and spending this time with me. I'll catch you in the next episode of this mini-series. So please be well in the meantime. Take really good care of yourself. And if you'd like to connect, you can head over to josephinehartman.com, or as always, send a note to me at josephinehartman.com. I would love to hear from you.